The first item of business today will be the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, additions? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. The next item is the minutes from the May 24th meeting. Are there any other any additions, amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, any minutes? Oh, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. The first item is the non-consent business item, 2023-102 JT, the 2023 Unified Budget Amendment. We have Mr. Stewart McMullan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Stewart McMullan, Director of Budget and Operations, and I'm bringing forward the 2023 second quarter budget amendment. This amendment makes changes to the operating budget in Regional Administration, Community Development, MTS, and Metro Transit, and changes to the capital budget in Community Development, Environmental Services, MTS, and Metro Transit. The proposed amendment was reviewed and approved by the Community Development Committee on June 5th, the Transportation Committee on June 12th, and the Environmental Services Committee yesterday on June 13th. Finance Directors Ed Petrie, Heather Giesel, and Ned Smith are also here and available to answer any questions you might have. In Regional Administration, the amendment adds one permanent FTE in Human Resources for e-learning and converts one 2-year temporary staff person to a permanent FTE in real estate. HR also adds two 2-year temporary staff people for talent acquisition, and Information Services adds two 2-year temporary staff people to support Metro Transit's iDash program. An additional contract for $500,000 is added to the audit budget to support follow-up work in our transportation programs, and an additional contract for $125,000 is added to the communications budget for a cultural assessment. In Metro Transit, the amendment brings an additional $50 million in federal pandemic relief funds to the bus operations budget, accelerating the budgeted drawdown of federal funds. In MTS, the amendment moves $518,000 in MVES funds from the contracted services operating budget to their capital budget, and $518,000 in federal funds from the contracted services capital budget to the operating budget. Lastly, in community development, the amendment adds $6.75 million to the Parks Pass-Through Program budget to recognize an increased fiscal year 2024 appropriation from this past legislative session. Turning to the capital budget, the amendment makes changes to 38 projects in the community development budget. It also makes changes to 36 projects in Metro Transit. Most notably, it moves $100 million in federal pandemic relief funds from the Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, into the Authorized Capital Program, or ACP, for the Green Line Extension Project. It also makes changes to 71 projects in the MTS capital budgets and 3 projects in environmental services. These changes are detailed specifically in the attached tables 9, 10, and 11. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2023 Unified Budget as amended and in accordance with the attached tables. With that summary, you can answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Stewart. I appreciate that, and apologies for being late. I was finishing up a meeting with Matt Latour in audit, and so thank you, Vice Chair Lee. I appreciate you stepping in for me. So with that, are there any questions on this item? Any questions? All right, then seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
It's been moved by Lilligren. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Barber, Councilmember Barber. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, no. And that passes unanimously. So thank you very much. That was a big, big amendment and for all the right reasons. So appreciate the detailed explanation and also that it's gone through a couple of other committees too. So with that, we'll move on to the information section of our agenda, and we will be discussing anti-racism and economic justice. And we've got Cy Jordan from the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. So Cy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair, Council members. Cyrenthia Jordan, I go by Cy, Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. My pronouns are she, her, hers. It's good to be here with you this afternoon, and so I want to talk to you about our commitment to the Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust, and we refer to it as AREJ. We've talked about the Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust for a couple years now here at the Council, and so we've really taken some steps to be invested in it over the past year and a half. We have done some reporting collectively, and so just going to reintroduce that to you and the new members of the committee as well and talk about next steps in that work. And so we start off with the first slide that you've seen quite often here at the Council. No one community can do it alone, no one office, no one council member, and so we're all in this together, and that's what we want to talk about here today. And so not only do we serve the 7 counties, we serve more than the 3 million residents. That's also inclusive of our own 3,900 or so employees as well throughout the council. And in our mission to foster efficiency and economic growth in the region, we want to keep moving towards that direction with this work. So what is the AREJ, or the Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust? It is a commitment that has been signed on by Chair Zelli to work with the Center for Economic Inclusion. So CEI, they are the convener of a number of agencies, including private and public. We're currently at the count of 3 public agencies and 3 private sector employers that are working towards one common results-based statement. And so the gist of the work is to continue to bring those different agencies and employers together to talk about what we're doing individually in our work towards equity and specifically towards anti-racist movement, and then also to talk about how we can learn from each other, how we can model from each other, and then what it is that we cannot do alone and we need to do collectively in this region. They're using the systems-based model for change management that I'm sure many of you have seen in different ways. And so starting with the policies and practices and resources, we often want to jump there when we talk about structural change within our systems, but we really need to be at the bottom in most of our efforts talking about our mental models and how we do our work, what's the thought we put towards change before we get to the level of actually implementing different policies and practices. And so with that, the CEI has put together this model, thinking through having the basis be around people, around philanthropy, around policy, products, and procurement. And we're looking for the basis of inclusive growth, economic development, human capital, and transportation and access as some of the focus areas. Our results-based statement was born by bringing a number of individuals other than just these 6 agencies. So again, this started about 2 years ago. There was a lot of community involvement and engagement in workshopping and working on what would be the results. So starting from the point is, what is it that we actually want to accomplish? And working backwards into what are our indicators and what are our strategies and what will our actions be. So this was the result statement that came forward. All Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian people in Minnesota experience intergenerational economic prosperity. And in order to make that movement, we want that to be achieved for each racial group. Within Metropolitan Council, we work together with the peer action team. We had some original members that are with us now, our former RA, former deputy RA, Councilmember Rivas Chambliss was involved in the effort, along with Lisa Barajas, Marcy Simon, who's our former HR director, Jody Jacoby, our procurement director. And we worked through 8 indicators. So we're starting around the 4 concepts of people. We're also taking a look at our policy, our procurement, and our investments. And so in our people category, we have the indicator. We start with what do we want to measure? What should be our measure? And so we start with percentage of employees identified as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian within our workforce and within our leadership. We want to get to the outcome over time. We do have some intermediary steps between 1 year, 3 years, but we want to get to outcomes over time that each of these groups at each level of our workforce and leadership reflect the regional population projection of 2030. And so we're making movement in that direction. We have our second indicator, median wage ratio between the racial groups and white employees, that no gap exists as our outcome. And then for our outcome number 3, we have all employees in Metropolitan Council earn a family sustaining wage. We've already started some strategies and some efforts in this regard, and we've had some success even in number 3. And so with that, if we think through, in 2021, we had around 262 employees that were making under the medium wage number of $25.12 based on the Brookings Institute model. And in 2022, at the end of 2022, based on some labor negotiations and keeping this outcome in mind, we had just 28 employees that were making under that number. And we have identified what jobs and positions those are, and we'll be doing some further work on that. We have had a little backtracking even as of first quarter, and so we're at 37 employees. And so we want to think through, as we continue to grow and start to bring people back into the organization, how is it we're being intentional about our hires and the wages that they're making as they come into our organization. So even as we set our strategies, we need to keep focus on them, and we need to keep that action towards what we say we want as our outcomes. I will.
Sorry, just one second. Councilmember Pacheco, you have a question.
Just a quick one. How can we go backwards unless we were targeting an individual or working with individuals? It seems like if you were made an adjustment and went down based on system adjustments, you would only go up, and you wouldn't go back unless you're dealing with individuals. Am I correct, or am I?
Chair, council member, and so we think of it this way as we continue to hire. So let's say, for example, we had 3,500 employees. These numbers aren't exact. 3,500 employees as of December 2022, but by the end of Q1, we had 3,600 employees. And so out of that, as we hired more people under the $25 range.
Madam Chair.
Yep.
That's right. Why would we? Well, maybe we have to look at how we can. There shouldn't be that range available.
Right.
Am I correct?
Councilmember Chair, and so that's our work ahead. And so looking at how do we sustain what it is that we say we want as an outcome. So we took some action, we had a strategy, there was some work in our labor negotiations, and then as we continue to hire, what is the work we're doing with individual managers? Are we assessing these positions to make sure they're not within that range? So that is continued work. So that's just an example of what more we have to do, even as we start and continue this effort.
And to that point, I think, Cy, just from picking up where you're leaving off, I think that it is a requirement of the council, unless there would need to be some sort of an exemption, and I don't know what that would be. Because I know we have a big council and the managers are all doing their thing, but I don't, from my time here and just what I've learned, I'm not sure everybody is at the same level or on the same page, and it's a big job to make sure that for every hire and every job classification, I just want to make sure that to the point where you're saying it's systematized, that it's not a want, it's a requirement if possible. And I'm sure that's what you're working to, but I guess what I'm trying to say from governance, we want that to be something that is required unless there's some extreme example where it couldn't be met, and I don't know what that would be. I've been asking the very thing this past year, so I'm just saying you have our support to push as hard as you need to, and if you need more support to get folks where they need to be, for whatever reason there is, let us know. Because I think this is great work, and we want to make sure that everybody here at the council, as we hopefully become a model for others, that we're making sure people can afford to live in this region in a dignified and decent way.
Sure, thank you for that comment, and yes, and so this is not just the work of our Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, so as we continue to partner with Human Resources and specifically even with Labor Relations to have those conversations about what are these positions. So we have a list of what they were in 2022, now we need to look back to where they are now at the end of Q1 and have those deeper conversations and decide on what the action will be.
Great. And just a side note, Phil, maybe we can have a conversation with those other departments too. I just want to make sure that they're really working with USI, and I'm sure they are, but I think they need to know that this body is going to really ask everybody to step up so that your job is, I don't want to say easier, but it's maybe more satisfying as we're more than meeting our goals here. So.
Thank you, Chair. And so I will step back also and say that as we take a look at these 8 indicators, these indicators are not completely new to the organization. So they are born again out of our, not only out of the work that we're doing collectively as CEI, but we had to set our own indicators as an organization. So they come from our council strategic plan, they come from our affirmative action plan and the priorities that we've set. And with that, we have a work group with HR of 11 priorities out of that. It also comes out of our equity policy and framework. So this is a mix of what we've said as an organization we're already going to do. And so we've condensed it in these 8 indicators for this action. That's not everything we're doing in the organization, but we are focused on these 8 indicators for the work we're doing as this collective body with CEI.
And I think that when we talked about the cross-cutting or the cross lines of work that we do here at the council, this is what we're talking about, right? We want to make sure that it's seeping in and being taken very seriously, and we're here to help you do that however we can.
Thank you. Your support is definitely noted and will be called upon, of course.
Or they can come here and tell us why it's not happening.
As we continue to look through our next category of, we're still on people here, and so as we move to our next category of procurement, we have 2 indicators specific to procurement, again, not new in the work that we're doing, but set out in terms of an indicator and where we want to go and outcome. And yes, some of these outcomes are huge, and we're looking towards meeting them. It's going to take a lot of work to get to them, but we fully believe that as an agency, if we say that we want to get to that results-based statement of having intergenerational prosperity for these groups, that we will need to take specific action and intentional action to get there. And so with our indicator number 4, we start with a percentage of procurement spend with the Black, Indigenous, Latinx, or Asian-owned businesses in Minnesota, and we want to get to direct spend. We've been focused over the last 5 years in particular on our spend that we have the most control over, so our local and state funds, and so that's what we have here with our MCUB program, and again, coming out of our own strategic plan as a council to reach 30% in our spend. And so we're continuing to work towards that effort with MCUB, but also carry this over in all the spend that we're doing across the council. We set goals in different ways. You're going to hear from Ashanti Payne in just a moment where we are on some federal goals that we've set, but we want to get to collectively, not just with MCUB, but all of our spend over time. And so this is where we've set our sights right now for this particular indicator. And then for number 5, as we continue to grow in spend, we notice and we have data that as we spend, we continue to spend with white women-owned businesses as a part of the small business class. And so we do want to continue, and there's room in the council to have more spend and more growth with white women-owned businesses, but also to reduce that disparity gap with the race-based businesses. And we believe that we can accomplish that. We've also seen that in our numbers last year. We have slipped back a little bit this year, but we're continuing to work on that as we move forward in 2023. And so we'll have to work towards some specific strategies and milestones to achieve that. And so in our investment indicators, we have 6 growth rate of home ownership for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, or Asian people across the region, with our outcome to eliminate racial gaps in home ownership in the Twin Cities region. And then we have our 7th indicator, total amount invested toward capital. And as we think about that capital, we've been focused on our certificate of deposits program. Since then, we have a different effort as well with RFP banking, which we may include within this indicator and outcome. For now, we are focused on the CD program, We had a commitment of spending $25 million. We have deposited $18.5 million. I understand that that's currently on hold right now, even though we have new businesses that we will eventually be depositing with. What we are focusing on in the meantime as one of our strategies is assessing the results and outcomes from that current invested at $18.5 million. So we have a survey that is either out or soon will be out to those local banks and credit unions to understand how they are spending and who they are spending with and what's the impact of those funds. And then we have our 8th indicator around policy, and is to take a look at our policies as we have been doing the heavy lift of looking at each and every policy within the council for updating and moving them to an updated system. We're also taking a look at them through an equity lens, and so we have that commitment that of all the policies that we update, 100% of those policies will be reviewed with an equity lens and include multiple stakeholders' input. So we're not currently using the system that we had set our sights on and we've been working on with over the last year or 2 years. But we still have the commitment to the impact. And so as we move to SharePoint and think about what system we will use in the future, we're still going to look at that lens as we bring about changes in any policy that we have within the organization. Any questions or additional questions quickly about the indicators that we've set forth?
The only thing I would say, and again, maybe Phil, we can follow up on this, is just making sure that the metrics and stats and data are being kept within all of the divisions. So I know they all roll up to you, but at any point in time or on some sort of a basis, I'd like to know how each division is doing, moving forward or slipping back. So not to get too much into the weeds, but this is important work, and just so that the policymakers really know, who's doing a great job at this and where aren't we getting where we want to go and why. Again, all to help you.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes, we're working with a data team internally within the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, but also across the organization with IS as well for how we capture that information electronically.
Great. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay. So we're going to move to the next part and have some engagement from you as council members as well. So as we continue to do this work, as we do with any of our work, we know that we need to have a shared message and get to either a definition or a statement about what it is that we're actually doing as an organization. That's consistently been asked for as we've had discussions around what is our commitment and involvement in the Anti-Racism and Economic Justice Trust, how do we define it? And so we're taking an approach to ask the council to put together a resolution around this work. We have some proposed language that is really just introductory to get the conversation started. If we think about anti-racism as a whole, it's really about individual behavior and individual impact, whether or not an individual is committed to being an anti-racism or opposing any practices that harm others and correct any past harm. And so what does it mean for us to set an institutional value as an organization? So this, again, is a conversation starter about Met Council believing that being an anti-racist is an individual and personal awareness that requires active behavior of every leader, employee, and collaborative partner to disrupt the status quo, invest in different approaches, empower all voices, and resolve critical questions in policy and practice of who has benefit and who has been harmed, to dismantle systemic racism and the disparities, unearned privileges, and underserved disadvantages it causes. And so I want to ask you to weigh in on your thoughts about movement towards a council resolution, some work towards this statement, and a fuller proposed. This is our opportunity to think about how we want to identify ourselves as an organization as we move forward, again, collectively in the work that we're doing. We've had some discussion in the past, even when we went through the safety and security, of whether or not we needed a definition towards anti-racism, but because this is clearly defined work in that regard, we want to move that forward here. So I want to open it up to either some initial thoughts, and I will tell you that even since we put this PowerPoint together, our office has spent some time kind of reworking and tweaking what language could look like.
So Sounds good. Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a great start. I think the part that I like about it the most is so often you see statements or plans or things like this, but they're very passive, where this feels more like it's more of an active statement of actually doing something instead of admiring things and admiring the problems. And I also do like the fact that it's calling out dismantling the historic disparities, because I think also people almost naively just want to look to the future, we can make it better, but you can't do that without looking kind of in the past as to what happened. So I actually kind of appreciate at least where this is headed.
Councilmember Lee?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So this is a great start. I really appreciate this draft. 170, 50, 60 years ago when Leland Stanford was executive of the railroad companies, he at first he didn't let he disallowed the Chinese laborers to work on his company's railroads because he was afraid that the Chinese laborers would steal jobs from the white laborers. And then when he became governor of California, he realized that a lot of white folks weren't going to work on the railroads, so he had to change his heart. And he, as governor of California, he openly recruited Chinese laborers. And so these kinds of things are systemic and they're institutional, and for us to be at this juncture where we're trying to kind of undo the past and the harm of the past to correct our systems and institutions going forward is a great start.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Councilmember
Yeah,
Lee?
thanks, Heidi. Thanks to your team for doing this work. I agree with Councilmember Barbara as well. I think this is a great start. When I read it in prep for this committee, I thought it seems like it could use a little work, a little finessing. So it doesn't surprise me to say that your team has taken maybe another look at it or so. But I think the spirit of it is right on. It seems a little long maybe, but the things that Councilmember Barber pointed out about it being active, active behavior, and I think the dismantling part is important too. And there was something else I was going to say, and now I all of a sudden have lost it. But I think it had to do with the historic kind of nature. But it feels like we're not here to wordsmith at all. But it feels like some of these pieces are sort of redundant and kind of can be put into a little bit more streamlined or elegant language. But I think it's a great start.
Councilmember Cedarberg, Cy, did you want to respond to that quickly first?
No, thank you, council members, and so that's what the action would be next, is how do we bring it to a concise statement that would be actually approved and move forward as a resolution by the council members, and having a group to do that, along with the additional strategies and milestones that we need to have associated with this work as a whole.
Councilmember Cedarberg?
Thank you, and I wanted to thank you for your initial comments on how this fits in with all the other work we're doing with the strategic plan. And so we have a lot of this work going on in a lot of different places, so we're going to have to be consistent across all these different strategic plan and your office and other offices. And so I appreciated that, because I was like, how does this fit in with that and everything like that. So that was good, and I think we have to keep our eyes on that. However this statement is looking, that this shows up in our strategic plan, it shows up in every place where we're looking at it. And so for me, this is a statement, I think it says everything that needs to be said. It's just, for me, it's punctuation. When you have commas and hyphens, you don't know which follows which and which is attached to which. So that's some of the tightening up that I think has to be done, is to get the more formal punctuation, so things, what go together correctly and what adjectives go with what prepositional phrases, etc. So that was some of the confusing part at the end with the hyphens and the dashes. That confused me, but I figured it out, but it was like, we don't want to be confused. But just, it's really great to see, and we need to, as Chair said, to really keep this at the forefront of all our divisions and all our staff. And we're committed to doing that.
Thank you. Councilmember Pacheco?
Yes, I I again, also like others, appreciate the effort to put this together and move forward. I'm kind of, when I look at it, especially in the business we're in, where it's more systems and constructions and it's something broader, or there's just a statement that, for example, that would go to one of our federal reports that's starting out, we have an anti-racism position or something. So it starts big, but then when we implement it, we're asking for personal commitments to this and that. It's very individual or personal. So I haven't figured out how to marriage those two and look at how do we impact it, and then to draw metrics around it is even more difficult. I agree with the intent. I just am having a tough time figuring out how we would ask an individual to be more aware or more efficient or disruptive. And so, anyway, I have to think about it myself. I'm slow with this stuff.
Yep,
Yeah, thanks.
Councilmember
Thanks,
Logan.
Councilmember Pacheco, because I had made some notes kind of in that same realm, and I really appreciate Gail's comments as well. I think maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's a style thing, but could we make it clear? But this is the part that I'm just kind of stumbling on a little. And Councilmember Pacheco, I think it relates kind of to, or maybe it doesn't, but for me it does. But it's anti-racism. What are we calling this statement or value, right? And for me, opening this value statement, saying Metropolitan Council believes being anti-racist is, on and on. And to me, it's lacking any commitment, right? We can believe something all we want or express it. It's a Met Council. I don't know. It's a statement and it's standing there. But I feel like there's almost like a cultural sense within that it isn't. I feel like it could be one step stronger. And from what we're hearing in this committee, it sounds like there's support to move in this direction when we can get this right. But I don't know. Am I being clear at all?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
Yep,
all right.
I got you.
Engaged, commits,
Yeah, commits or something.
Yeah.
or active.
This is how we behave.
Well, and Councilmember Barber, I'll be with you in a minute, because I thought that maybe opening it up, saying to be effective in our collective internal and external work, both our internal and external work, the Met Council believes, just set that bigger, like this is our statement and here's how we get there. So, and I agree too, maybe this is a few sentences, breaking it apart and just making some clear and concise groupings in all of these good pieces that are in here. So, Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just sort of following up on Councilmember Lilligren, I think that, that I like the tie to individual and personal awareness. I think we do need to make sure that we tie it to the overall organization somehow, but then also to help provide resources or something that there's a commitment to provide resources, training, different things to help that individual and personal awareness, where you're kind of helping, this is the overall values, this is how we're going to help our employees and the people to live up to those values. I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm afraid we're not being very helpful. Or I'm not.
I feel like this is going to be.
But it is. There's something about putting a belief out there, and then there's something about
The commitment to it.
about embracing that belief
Yeah.
or subscribing to that belief, and I feel like there's just that little bit of that step is missing.
So to that point, I think if we get that beginning statement as of why this is important to our work and its effectiveness, we believe these things, and then we can end it with, and our commitment and the council's commitments to its resources and talents to do so. Like, we're going to put whatever it takes to get it done. Needs to be there at the end.
Yeah, money and effort.
Yeah. So
That better words.
Cy, when are you hoping to kind of get this to, the 99% of where it needs to be before it comes to council, and what's the path?
So we could look to bring this back to the council probably towards the end of July, early August, in terms of moving it forward with a resolution and having that conversation in the meantime and formalizing the statement. And so I appreciate the input that you've shared here today. One of the things is that we purposely chose not to make it a definition. The council right now is working on several definitions. We have a definition of equity in our former council equity policy. We have a separate equity task force through the regional development guide for the 2050 out planning. So we're doing a lot of work, but to the point we're saying, are we going to put in a statement that we need to be collective in all of the work that we're doing across the council? Certainly that's a valid point we could put here. This statement is going to go on top of the indicators and the work that we're already doing here specifically, but it does take individual action. And to some points that I've heard, we are doing some of the work we're discussing, and we want to continue to be intentional about that. So we have done with this council the IDI and ICS inventory. We've done that with our managers and leaders. We've had a very formalized race-based racial equity training over the last year and a half throughout our organization with all of our employees. And so we're putting effort behind those, but to the points made, we can make sure that we're being collective, we're being intentional, that we're reinforcing those, and we continue those in all of the strategies that we're working on.
And just to that point, I want to make sure, so all the employees are getting the training, which is great, but we're bringing on new employees, so I would like HR and everybody to make sure that they know that, you know, this is what they're signing up for, and if they can't sign up for this, then they can go work somewhere else, because we're gonna need to, you know, keep onboarding people. So Barbara, then Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And quickly, just to go back to some of the indicator outcome, I really like that. Like, we've been very good sometimes about laying out the indicators, not always very good about defining well the outcomes. Are we gonna publish that like somewhere in a dashboard or something like that, so it's really public facing?
Yes. Yes.
And I just want to reaffirm what you're saying. Already with Phil and even with Matt and others at the council, I'm having discussions about what information should be coming here, what information do we want to be coming here, and we are very happy to look at all the requests that come and grant them, but we want to have that accountability back on, like, okay, how did that investment or that whatever we're giving to staff to go do the work, how did that pan out? So exactly what you're talking about, Councilmember Barber, and this group I think is really, hopefully within the next year, I'm looking at you, but you know, get to the place where we're like, okay, we've got a dashboard, or we've got a metric, or we've got something that we can talk publicly about it too. Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, cool, thanks. And two things. One is thanks for that description, especially of the other work that's going on, Sally, and how this, it's very dynamic, right? And they all kind of interrelate, and I can appreciate that. One thing I like about iterating an anti-racism value is that it's clearly about race, right? And we talk about equity, and like it can get very hazy very quickly. Who are we really talking about? Was it geographic equity or what kind of equity? And we do our best, right, to expand that explanation, to prioritize race within that. But what I like about this is that it is clearly about race, right, and unequivocally. And so I feel like as we go forward, this value statement will become something that's important to be able to hook a lot of our work into, that's around race, issues of race and reparative justice and these other kinds of ideas. So for me, that's the maybe nuance or the difference between some of the other work that's going on. So
That's great, yeah.
Oh, and the other thing was,
oh no, go ahead.
and the other thing was, and I don't know what the plan is to bring this forward, but it is, you know, a new way of doing our business, and so and we want to make sure that there's buy-in, and you know, we certainly hear from other council members when things kind of emerge from one committee and they maybe they haven't been discussed or socialized through other committees. And so I don't know, because of sort of the landmark nature of this, I don't know if the plan is to bring it through other committees as well, but my sense is it would benefit from doing that.
Yeah, I think that that's a good idea, because you know, the council will be voting on it. You know, enough of us are on the council, but I think it's always a good idea. I've heard many times in the past couple of years, especially coming through COVID, how more council members just need to be in the know along the way.
Or committee of the whole.
Yeah, something like that would be great. And I like the word you used too, unequivocal. I mean, maybe we say unequivocally believes, you know, and so there's no doubt. And I also, to Councilmember Lee's point about the historic systemic racism, I mean, let's be honest, there is current efforts to continue forward with systemic racism. So it's not just about what's happened in the past, but it's about the current climate that we're in and being prospective to tamp down that and stop that as well. And I know, you know, I'm just trying, you know, making sure that, you know, we're being as aggressive as we can be in this. And I would just say, when we've got a lot of organizational change that's coming to the council, and we're going to be bringing on new leaders, and there needs to be kind of a reformation of, what do we believe in, what are we doing, getting these leaders all on the same page once we fill a lot of the spots that are open right now. But I also believe that once we really get where we need to be, and we're further along certainly with the 2050 Regional Development Guide, but more immediately with this work, I would like to see this not just, in some file on the shared drive, but I would like to see our statements public and in the workspace so that people are reminded every day that this is what we're doing, whether it's this work or some of the other important things that we're going to do. We have very beautiful offices, but, I would just want to make sure everybody's reminded every day why we're coming to work here. That's tactics, which is down the road, but this is great work. So how about this? If the committee members are willing to, in the next 2 weeks, just take a stab at adding in some comments on the statement and sending it to Cy, just so that you've got maybe, after a little bit more thought, some additions, subtractions, editing, and then would that work for you, or do you have enough from us right now with what we provided, or how would you like to proceed with our input?
Thank you, Chair, and so that's certainly welcome. You can certainly submit any comments or thoughts to us directly, and we'll get them incorporated. We will be taking the next step of presenting them before Cal, going back to executive leadership, talking through what we've shared here today, and then presenting it. We can certainly do that at a Cal meeting before we would, of course, come back to the management and get to any action for an official vote. And so this is, I think, the next step for us to have a statement around the work that we've already been committed to for the last year. And just generally, I had a slide about what we had already done, and as we're moving forward, and even meeting with Chair Zelle last week, is that we are reaffirming our commitment to continue in this work. And so we had that initial group that we put together. We came up with our indicators, our outcomes. We've been working on some strategies and milestones, but this is going to be a larger effort, of course, with the council member and continued engagement as well with community about what are the additional strategies and milestones to get to that results-based statement for intergenerational wealth. And to that end, we've also been engaged with EAC, not just in the presentation, but they also contributed to the formation of that initial statement that we brought to you here today. So we'll do work to form up and formalize that, present that again, have another open discussion with all council members involved, certainly be talking internally, and then move forward. I'm not quite certain if we're going with just a peer action team. We need to expand for our strategies and then move into engagement. So those are our next steps. We've done some work to get us started, to move us forward, to make our commitment not only something that we express, but to be active. And so now we're going through the next steps of continued engagement and then this statement around what it is that we're doing and reaffirming our commitment to.
Great. Well, Sai, you have our strong support. Just as you're out, working with the teams, it is expected of them. It's not something that we want, it's an expectation, and everybody needs to get where they need to get so that we can get where we want to go. So whatever resources you need along the way, keep us in the loop. We want to make sure, I think to Councilmember Barber's point, let us know what you need to get the job done, because it's too important to have anything get in the way. So we're here to support you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thanks everybody, good input, and appreciate the hard work on this by everybody involved. Alrighty, next up we have Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, and we're gonna get our DDE utilization report. So welcome, Ashanti, glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Council and Committee members, Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director, Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. And as many of you know, as part of our responsibilities and requirements for administering the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program on behalf of USDOT and FTA, one of those requirements to ensure continued federal funding through that funding stream is that we report on a semi-annual basis our progress and participation of DBEs in our procurements here at the Metropolitan Council. We do that in June 1st and December 1st each year. June 1st is the first half check-in, so to speak, and then December includes the second half and our overall yearly participation. And I will say that we did submit our report on time to FTA on June 1st. We are in the last federal fiscal year of our current triennial period. We set that overall goal on a 3-year basis. And then we are in progress right now of doing the work for our next triennial period and 3-year goal, working with a third party, with the University of Minnesota, and the team put together by Dr. Sam Myers. So how we get about in terms of measuring that participation, it includes all construction, architectural and engineering projects, professional and technical. And we have a team within the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity that establishes specific contract goals. I just thought that was going to happen magically. Yeah. Just talking. So yes, and all of what I just said. Bottom line, our first half achievement, overall achievement was 6.5%, which is well short of our 14% goal. I could speak to, I'm going to speak to some of those factors that probably contributed to that shortfall. And just for information, if we are still short in the December period, we're required to put together what's called a shortfall analysis that gets submitted that basically outlines what we analyze in terms of what contributed to any shortfall, what we're going to do to address those shortfalls, and how we're going to measure that moving forward. Having done those in the past, in my past life, it's not fun, so I am glad I can delegate that now. Actually, let me back up and say, we are not anticipating having to do the shortfall analysis.
And if we were to, you would have to.
Yes.
Yes. Great. No, we won't have to. That's a good goal.
What I will say too is, looking at this report, of the subcontracting opportunities, DBEs were awarded almost 50% of the subcontracting opportunities that were available. This next slide just shows kind of the distribution by race and by gender. As you can see, it is scarce, but our spend was very low in this first half. Just as a comparison, our total federal spend was $19 million in this first 6 months. If you compare that to the complete last year, we had over $240 million and $43 million that went to DBE. So the DBE from last year is more than double our total spend in the first 6 months. This is kind of shows where the distribution of businesses are in terms of their certification in our directory, how they're broken out in terms of location in the metro, greater Minnesota, and interstate DBEs that have sought certification with our state certification process, and then how that manifests itself or plays itself out in our procurements, in our results. Like I said before, some of the reasons that contributed to the low number of DB participation, we had a fast fare fare box upgrade purchase, which accounted for, it was $6 million, which accounted for like 31% of our overall spend, and that had no subcontracting opportunities. We purchased directly from a vendor, and that was probably made up the bulk of that, 31% of that spend And there were, of the contracts that were let, as I pointed out before, we did get, that had opportunity for subcontracting, we did get good participation. In talking with the folks, specifically Director Thompson at Metro Transit, and having conversations around this, we do anticipate in the next 6 months of having one more significant spend. Some capital projects will be coming up where we are hoping to offset the first half participation. Some of the things of highlights, we did have some DBs that were awarded prime contracts. We had 3 different female Caucasian firms that were awarded prime contracts. And let me say this too, before I get started. I'm going to be using some terms that come from the regulations and of the program that probably we may all agree that all of them are not inclusive. So I just apologize ahead of time. I'm using the statutory and regulatory terms in describing some of the communities and individuals that participate in this program. So we also had one Native American male firm awarded a contract, one Black American male firm, and 2 Asian Pacific male firms that were awarded contracts in this period. One of the things that we definitely heard from some of our other presentations is that it is very helpful to see trend data and how we have done in the past. So this provides a look at how we have done since 2019. I will note that in 2019 and 2020, our goal was 15%. So 2019, we exceeded the goal. 2020 was one of those years, the only year that we did have to provide a shortfall analysis to FTA. We met 13%. Last year, 2021, we barely made our goal, but we made it. And 2021 was not last year. 2021, we barely made our goal, 14%, but we made it. Last year was our highest participation that we achieved in our program, in our administration of this program at 18.22%. And there we are in the first half. So we have had a pretty good record in terms of our achievement in meeting our goal, and we hope to continue that trend. And some of the things, and we've talked about some of these in depth in other presentations, but these are some of the strategies that we employ to ensure that we do stay on the right track and are trending in the right direction. Our targeted outreach, where we see gaps to connect with those communities and businesses, the meet and greets, both individual and connecting businesses to the decision makers within the council and then within those business units. Mentor Protege has definitely been a successful strategy. We revamped our goal setting process and our contract initiation memo process. We have an engagement and development unit to help us expand our impact. A data team that Cy mentioned as well. And we have a master contract that is going through the contract initiation process with procurement right now, that we will be employing third-party entities to administer supportive services, technical assistance, training, access to resources to small businesses to build capacity and position them to take advantage of opportunities, contracting opportunities with the council. So with that, and I'll just mention that Trina Bolton from our office is the one who puts this report together and makes sure that I get this submitted on time to FTA. So I want to recognize her and her team in the small business unit that puts this information together. And I will stand for any questions.
Awesome, thank you, Ashanti. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Ashanti, to you and your team for the work. And when you went over the success stories, in slide 6, there were the 5 points, that's all included within that 1.245 million, right? All of the total number of DB.
Oh.
The 1.2,
Yes.
okay, great, I'm just clarifying that too. Thanks, and then, I know this is kind of maybe an out of left field question, so, but at what point, is there a point, I guess is the question, where we can ever use our goals, our DBE participation goals, as an evaluation metric when we're evaluating bids, right? Is that, or is this not a bid situation here, or is there a way of weighting it? That's what I'm asking, so that when you look at the performance drop off this year, it's a little startling, right? And we have half a year to make that up, right? So it's not hopeless, but it's quite a climb. And so I'm just wondering, are there ways of weighting the results toward our priorities? Ways that we're not using today?
Madam Chair, Council Member, good question, and I'm hoping I understand it fully.
Okay.
So legally, we are not allowed to use a goal in that way.
Okay.
We have to evaluate based on our procurement practices, whichever it is, whether it be best value
Sure.
or low bid. And once we've made that determination, then we can look at their achievement towards the goal.
Okay.
And their good faith efforts if they haven't met the goal. What I would say may be more important in anticipation, what this highlights and our shortfall highlights is the importance to engage us early on in the planning and scoping process.
Sure.
And when we're planning on where we're spending our federal funds that we receive, because that would allow us to be more proactive.
Sure.
In terms of how, okay, we know that this fast fare box is coming and we don't have these projects, as opposed to when we get to the point where, okay, OEEO, either set a goal or not, this is it's a shared responsibility, and we can say, yes, engage us early, but we've got to build in that into our process of, hey, when we're planning out these years ahead, how do we incorporate this conversation so that we have other options other than setting goals to get participation on some of those complex projects.
Okay. Thank you.
And you mentioned that, I think at our last meeting too, maybe Cy did, or somebody did pretty recently, about getting in front of or at the beginning of the process, as you that makes a lot of sense. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I think Ashanti pointed out one thing, that there are different purchases that are big purchases that make these numbers kind of swing all over at different points in time, good and bad. Like, it's hard to adjust, but I think we should start having a kind of a holistic conversation about it, because you have DBEs, you have MINCOMs, you have workforce. Yeah. I think we do that on like the Southwest project, some of the other projects, but we don't necessarily do that everywhere. Especially when we look at, like, say, the contracted services for Metro Mobility. Those are big contracts, but they're not DBE or MINCOM certified, but they meet a lot of the workforce goals or some of those things. So I think we have to look and set goals that kind of accomplish it somehow everywhere. And I know this is a specific federal FTA kind of report, but I think we're trying to have ultimately a broader conversation, I guess.
Yes,
yeah.
I totally agree. And it goes to the discussion we were having earlier. Everybody here has to be committed to the work and anti-racism and inclusion, and making sure that we're doing everything we possibly can at the best and most opportune time to accomplish the goals. It's not an ask, we're requiring this of everybody. So again, as you're out there, hopefully at some point, you hopefully have the agency and authority to just tell everybody how it's gonna be, because that's what we're empowering you to do. It's not like, I know you're up busy, or they come, I don't know what all the reasoning is, but we have to do this, and they need to be working with you as much as humanly possible to get this done. And I think you guys are, again, leaning into it, doing great work, kind of undoing the process to rebuild it and figure out how we get more DBEs, MCUBs, workforce in the pipeline. So keep going, but everybody at this council needs to know that you're running this and they gotta work with you. And if they don't, I wanna know about it. We wanna know about it. If there are places where we're not seeing the results and we don't understand why, and we're a bit insular or, siloed, we need to break that down. So that's why reporting is good for us, so that we find out where your pinch points are, and we can continue to govern throughout the council to Councilmember Barber and Lilligren and everybody's points that it's specific to FTA here as we report it, but it has to be internalized and become part of our DNA here at the council. Councilmember Pacheco.
Madam Chair, members, Ashanti, do you have individual strategies for, like for Latinos or for any other group that may have been missing there's number zeros around there? Do you have you have an overall strategy? Do you have one that's more ethnic specific?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Pacheco, yes. I may not have explained it very well, but part of that targeted outreach, that's part of that process. So 2021, we recognized we had specific gaps, specifically with spend with women-owned businesses in the Latino community as well as the Black community. So we had specific efforts and targeted those groups with our outreach and with getting them in front of the decision makers here within the council. And we were able to see the benefits that in 2022, we had much more equitable distribution of those dollars. I think the first time, and even the first half of 2022 was the first time I've seen in doing this work where another group other than Caucasian women had the most spend in our program, and that was with Latino-owned businesses. So I think we see some of those efforts, and when we see gaps or we see areas where we need to focus our attention and be specific, we definitely try to do that.
Madam Chair, like I said, I'm doing some work on the other half of that with the Latino Chamber of Commerce. And as we were looking at the numbers recently, and there were 1,700 Latino businesses that actually hire people. Because that's how the Secretary of State was breaking out, whether you're a business owner. And then there was another 10,000 that are individual owners. So that would be your real estate folks, your insurance folks, or whatever. So it's, so there's 1,900 or whatever that number is there. But looking at it, I was working with the Secretary of State's office. How many Latino businesses do you have that are certified, therefore can compete for a contract with the Department of Transportation, Corrections, whatever? And it was 84 out of 17 or 12,000 something. And then it was, okay, well, how many do you actually do business with? And well, we're going to try and find that number. So there's a big gap to be had in there. And by the way, the Latinas, that's true nationwide. They lead the groups of Latinas that have starting businesses. White women, everything else, they're actually at the top group. So we're looking at looking as in a kind of triad type thing. And so we're looking at where government is, how we're doing as Latino owners. What can we do to support and move that going forward? The chair of my board is head of supplier diversity for U.S. Bank, and we're looking at what's the corporate in there. And then the third one that's often been overlooked is where's the nonprofit community? I mean, they're mission driven. They don't have to make a quarterly stock report and whatever, but and so that's what we're just kind of looking at. It's not an anti-anything or affirmative action. It's really how government and us and this triangle can work to move these numbers forward. So I appreciate you do have a strategy around that. I'm co-chairing the equity committee now, and so we're looking at it as well. But because there's little things you can tweak to really make a difference in some of these numbers.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Council Member, I should also mention one of the things that we're in the process and hopefully finish soon is a part of our outreach is translating some of our program documents relative to certification with the hopes to bringing in more and reaching more businesses because there are a lot of businesses out there who have either chosen not to be certified for some reason or other or don't know the benefits or why it could be advantageous for them to be certified. So we are translating some of our outreach documents and program-related documents to reach some of those communities as well.
And again, I know it's been said before, it's interesting that the people we are trying to reach have to be certified, but majority does not have to be certified. So that just isn't helpful to anybody, I don't really think, unless there's something I'm missing, but there's that. So, because we hear about that all the time too. Okay, is there anything, I mean, let me say it this way, thank you for this work, or any other questions on this? So again, Ashanti, I would just challenge you that if you need anything from us, let us know. We want you to be very successful, we want you to be totally empowered, and we're not selling, we're telling. So,
Definitely appreciate that, Madam Chair,
yes,
in this committee.
Yep.
Thank you.
We're grateful, thank you. And I don't believe we have anything else to come before us today, so without objection, the meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shani.
Thank you.